There hasn't been a sign of a duck around here for 45 minutes.
But I'm Scrooge McDuck.
Get it? No? Well, you will after this. Remember Animaniacs? Remember Ducktales? Of course you do. They're among the most iconic and beloved cartoons in history. Well, that and they also have their own reboots. So that should further remind everyone of their existences. Because I wasn't even born at the time, I never got to experience any of Ducktales during its run. And Animaniacs ended when I was barely a year old. But I wasn't completely deprived of these shows. I had a few episodes of Animaniacs on DVD, about half a season's worth, and I was able to get a Ducktales VHS tape from a garage sale, and the tape had 2 episodes. And for years, that was all I ever got. But life still went on, and as I grew more and more familiar with the internet in the later years, I was able to find the original shows to the point where I was all caught up. Granted, it took almost a year to watch through it all, but it felt like a great feat regardless. For the sake of organization, I've prepared a list of elements to run through while reviewing these shows. That's definitely a first. Because Ducktales is the older franchise, I'll tackle that first. Ducktales centers around Donald Duck's nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, who are living with their great uncle, Scrooge McDuck, and they get into all sorts of adventures and shenanigans in each episode. For the record, at the time I'm recording this, I only finished the first season of the reboot, so feel free to call me out if any details I bring up are outdated. But please, no heavy-duty spoilers if you can help it. I'll start off the theme song. I have no real verdict. I'm torn between both versions. I prefer how the song sounded in the original, but in the reboot, the clips are more visually appealing, so I'm gonna leave this one at a tie. Now onto the characters and voice acting. The original show had Tony Anselmo as Donald Duck, who's been playing Donald for a good long while at this point. The nephews were played by Russi Taylor, who also played Minnie Mouse, as well as Martin and Sherry and Terry from The Simpsons. And McDuck was played by one of my all-time favorite actors, Alan Young. Some fellow boomers out there might recognize him as Wilbur from Mr. Ed, or Philby from The Time Machine. When it came to the youngsters, I always felt their ideal voice acting was from Russi Taylor, but not exactly from the original show. It wasn't until Once Upon a Christmas when I thought her performance was perfected. But in the reboot, these 3 have different actors, instead of them all being played by just one. You've got Danny Pudi, Ben Schwartz, and there's no way I'm gonna pronounce this right, Bob Moynihan as Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Then there's Webby. In general, she's alright. She was also voiced by Russi in the original show, and she sounded okay, but she started getting a little annoying after a while. As for the reboot, her voice has way more charm and energy. And who's behind Webby's voice this time? None other than the one and only Kate Micucci. Wait, that face. Where have I seen her before?
Thanks, I like them too.
Oh my god! Lucy! Oh, and apparently she's been in some other cartoons. The choice of giving the kids more adult-esque voices, I actually found to be a good idea. But maybe I'm just biased due to Gravity Falls. Jeez, I missed that show. Launchpad was a hard choice. His voice is almost completely similar in both shows, but since I have to choose, I'll have to say the original was slightly better. Like I said before, Launchpad's voice in both versions are very similar, but there is a bit of a difference with their personality. Sure, it's true that both of them aren't very bright, but there's still a bit of difference. At times, Launch can be a bit more obnoxious in the 17 version. In the 87 version, his personality has a bit more charm to it, which makes it more cute? Hopefully that makes sense. In the reboot, Donald's once again voiced by Tony Anselmo, one of the very few returning actors from the original, so there's no required contest there. There was also Taylor. She wasn't playing the nephews this time, but she apparently did the voice of a younger Donald in a time travel episode, or so I've heard. And last but not least, McDuck. I know this is really biased. Even though I thought David Tennant made a pretty good Scrooge McDuck, I loved Alan Young too much. He was just one of those guys it would have been almost impossible to replace entirely, kind of like Peter Sallis with Wallace. So I still think the original Scrooge McDuck was a little better. When it comes to the original show, the episodes are rather hit or miss. To me, one of the more interesting episodes was Blue Collar Scrooge. It's odd, but somewhat amusing to hear a different accent coming from McDuck.
That's the last straw. I'm gonna give that Scrooge what's-his-name a piece of my mind.
Whoa. Now he sounds even more like Wilbur. But then there's that guy. I just can't go on without pointing him out. Trump Card? If that hasn't aged like milk. Basically, these episodes are about the gang on a journey, and or taking down some villain. The reboot has a similar structure, full of hit or miss episodes. However, the reboot is a bit more story-driven than the original show. At least, I think so. As many times as I watched through the original show, I can't remember the show having as strong of a story, but there were still some pretty good story elements on their own. Sure, they tried recycling some story elements from the original show, but this time, it kept feeling like there was much more at stake. They brought back some of the classic villains too, such as Magica, the Beagle Boys, and Glomgold, as well as various side characters. So that was a nice touch. Some of the new characters are pretty neat too, especially Lena. I hope to God that wasn't the last we see of her. Well, I've gone on long enough with DuckTales, so I'll wrap up the segment with my thoughts on the two shows in general. Whether or not this was a stupid choice on my end is up to you, but I spent weeks watching the original and reboot back to back, and I have to admit, the reboot seemed to grab my attention more than the original. Basically, the reboot borrowed a lot of elements from the original show and greatly improved upon them. Most of these characters have a bit more charm, in both personality and voice acting. The animation's really interesting, the themes still alright, and the writers really know how to grab your attention with the story. I had a surprisingly good time with Season 1, and I'm looking forward to see what the rest of the show has to throw at all of us. And fear not, I will make a follow-up to this portion when I finally catch up with Seasons 2 and 3. So it seems this review is taking way longer than I was expecting. I mean, by the time I'm recording this session, the final episode already came out a few days ago. So, just for the sake of saving time, I'm splitting this review up into two parts. Next time, I'll be going into the Animaniacs reboot. There might be a few more projects that come in during the meantime. I don't really have a stable schedule planned out yet, so I don't know what's gonna come up next, but we'll see as time goes along, I suppose.